For the first time in 10 years, the hardest job in the world is up for grabs, as United Nations Secretary-General António Guterres approaches the end of his second term. The United Nations is searching for a new leader at a particularly difficult time for the organisation, which faces a funding crisis, wars, and geopolitical turbulence across the globe, and questions of its relevance in the world today. 4 people have put themselves forward for the role of Secretary-General, which was described by its inaugural holder, Trygve Lie, as the most impossible job on this earth. So, in this video, we're going to explain the upcoming UN Secretary-General selection, who's running, who decides, and the major challenges they face. If you love staying informed and want some of the best reporting on YouTube, then subscribe and ring the bell for more. The United Nations Charter describes the UN Secretary-General as the organisation's chief administrative officer. That basically means they lead the UN Secretariat and its global operations. Considered the world's top diplomat, they also bring issues threatening international peace and security to the Security Council, chair the board that brings together the heads of all UN agencies, act as a mediator and public voice during crises, implement the decisions of member states, and more broadly are expected to be a defender of the UN Charter, upholding and championing its values and moral authority. The UN itself faces significant challenges. For example, the non-payment and late payment of fees by dozens of member states, including its main contributor the US, has contributed to a cash liquidity crisis, undermining key operations like peacekeeping, and which incumbent Secretary-General Guterres says risks imminent financial collapse. Furthermore, wars and brazen violations of the UN Charter across the world, from Ukraine to Gaza to Iran, and deadlock in the Security Council in addressing them, have diminished trust in the UN and its relevance as a force for peace and security. The Secretary-General is appointed to a 5-year term, and is usually reappointed for a second, so the next Secretary-General, taking office on the 1st of January 2027, could serve until 2037. As for the selection process, candidates need to be nominated by one or more member states. The Security Council will recommend one of the candidates, with at least 9 votes and no veto from permanent members, to the General Assembly, which will vote on the appointment, requiring majority support from the 193 member states. The 9 Secretaries-General who have served in the role have been pretty geographically spread. It's worth noting that by precedent, the role is not filled by nationals from the 5 permanent Security Council members, China, France, Russia, the UK and the US, and that there is an unofficial and imperfectly followed convention that says the post should rotate regionally. Hence, Latin American countries say the next Secretary-General should come from their region, and 3/4 of the candidates do. There's also growing pressure for the role to be filled by a woman for the first time. So, who are the 4 candidates who have entered the race? In alphabetical order, they are Michelle Bachelet, the former president of Chile and former UN human rights chief, who's been nominated by Brazil, Mexico and previously Chile, although Chile's new right-wing government withdrew its support after taking office this year. Rafael Grossi, the incumbent head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, who's been nominated by his native Argentina, Rebecca Grinspan, the former vice president of Costa Rica and incumbent head of the UN Trade and Development Agency, nominated by Costa Rica, and finally Macky Sall, the former president of Senegal and former chairperson of the African Union, nominated by Burundi. These 4 are going for among the most high-profile jobs in the world, but the application process is surprisingly familiar to the rest of us, thanks to transparency measures introduced a decade ago. They've had to submit a CV and a vision statement, not dissimilar to a cover letter, and last week went through what were effectively job interviews, known as interactive dialogues, in front of the General Assembly and civil society, although it's still the behind-the-scenes power broking and campaign rounds in the major capitals that will decide things. All 4 acknowledge the UN's challenges, the need for reform, and to regain a seat at the table. Unlike a conventional election, there aren't clear policy differences. Rather, their differences are clearest in style and approach to the job and their priorities. Each has other strengths and weaknesses that could impact their candidacies. Michelle Bachelet, for example, would satisfy the calls for a both Latin American and female Secretary-General, and has a lot of executive experience at the national and UN level. She's foregrounded human rights in her campaign and says that she would be active on the ground in dialogue and peacemaking. However, the biggest obstacle facing her candidacy might come from the veto-wielding US. A group of Republican US legislators have urged the US to block her, claiming the centre-left pro-choice former politician supports an extreme abortion agenda. Rafael Grossi, meanwhile, has the most visible profile in recent years as IAEA head, particularly given the nuclear-related crises surrounding the wars in Ukraine and Iran, which he says proves his shuttle diplomacy and crisis-managing credentials. The Argentine, arguably the frontrunner, would meet demands for a Latin American to fill the role, but is not a woman. Analysts see him as making a relatively safe pitch, designed to keep the world's veto-holding powers on side. Against UN wishes, he's not stepped back from his IAEA role while campaigning to be Secretary General, so the outcome of ongoing US-Iran nuclear talks could help or hurt his prospects. As for Rebecca Greenspan, she's well regarded for her development work, and has pointed to her negotiating of the Black Sea grain deal amid the Ukraine war as evidence of her capabilities. She's a Latin American woman, and her relatively low profile, compared to the other candidates, could actually work in her favour when it comes to winning support from the big players on the Security Council. Greenspan said the UN had become too risk-conservative, and pitched herself as an active Secretary-General who would speak to every party, would propose 10 ideas even if they fail, and would accept the cost of rejection and keep trying. And finally, Macky Sall, who, while not being a woman or from Latin America, has a strong Global South background, foregrounded development in his pitch, and pressed the need to reinvigorate multilateralism. But he only has mixed backing from African countries. In fact, his native Senegal is not backing him, accusing him of having suppressed political opposition during his last years in office, and overseeing a turbulent transition of power. From late July, behind closed doors, the Security Council will deliberate and hold a series of straw polls to gauge support for, and indeed opposition to, the candidates, with a view to formalising the appointment between August and October. It's entirely possible that other candidates end up entering the race at a later date. In fact, some analysts have suggested that the unusually small pool of official candidates right now suggests that other potential candidates are sitting it out and waiting to see which way the winds are blowing, ready to jump if consensus is looking tricky. So you're probably wondering what's next for this story, and how it's going to develop over the coming days and weeks. But it might be overwhelming trying to sift through the thousands of news articles trying to find one that you can trust not to feed you a false narrative. Luckily, we have a simple solution for you, and that solution is Ground News. You've probably heard us talk about Ground News before, the app and website that shows how the same story is covered across the political spectrum. But now more than ever, we need Ground News to truly understand what's really going on in the world around us. It's difficult finding trustworthy news sources, so Ground News will do the hard work for you, compiling thousands of articles and putting them in one easy-to-access place. Each article comes with a breakdown into bias distribution, factuality, and ownership of each individual source. For instance, if we take this story on Michelle Bachelet hoping the world is ready for a female UN chief, we can easily see that 46 sources are currently reporting on it, with most of the coverage coming from the centre. Looking at the headlines, we can dive deeper to understand the differences in reporting on each side, with the left focusing more on the prospect of a female Secretary General, and the right shifting the emphasis to opposition to Bachelet's candidacy and her views on abortion. Our absolute favourite feature, though, is their blind spot feed. Here you can see all the stories you might not have seen on your usual feed, so even if you don't agree with the reporting, it's good to step out of your bubble. And it's not just us that feels this way. The Nobel Peace Centre also proudly endorses Ground News, calling it an excellent way to stay informed, avoid echo chambers, and expand your worldview. So, if you want to start questioning the narrative, you can join Ground News today. And using our link, you'll get 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan. All you have to do is subscribe through the link in the description, go to ground.news/TLDR or scan the QR code on screen, and you'll be supporting an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.